Good. Okay, so mostly everyone is sitting down, so I am going to start my talk. Okay, so I'm just going to start with this. CSS is hard. Who in here thinks that CSS is hard? Please raise your hands. All of you, the rest of you are lying. You've never tried actual CSS. Like Flexbox. Okay, CSS is hard, and how that relates to an alleyway. This will make sense in a bit. I think, maybe. So first part is that I want to tell a story. So last year, for about 4 months, I lived in London. And I first want to point out that this is London, and I actually lived here, and this is London, but it was considered to be London, and I was lied to. So that is Mill Hill. So if anyone ever tells you to go to Mill Hill because it's London, don't go. It's not. It's a trap. Okay, so every day as I went home, I had to go through this alleyway. That is the first photo that you see on the picture. And the thing is, I would go through this alleyway even if it was 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. And that doesn't make any sense, right? But I don't know. And the thing about that alleyway that was really creepy because it had no light whatsoever, is that there was actually another way. It just took 5 more minutes of walking, because instead of doing this, I had to like go around the thing. And but apparently I prefer to live in the fear of being stabbed than to actually walk those 5 minutes. So I didn't die, I'm still here, so every time someone started walking before me, I was like, yay, I'm gonna die in London. So I think it's the same thing with CSS. Like, remember Bootstrap? Remember the Bootstrap web? That was good days. That was all the moment where we all didn't want to go to the alley, and we were all just like, you know what? I'm just going to use Bootstrap. Screw this alley. I don't want to get stabbed. But at a certain point, when all our websites started looking the same, we started wondering maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe the web should be different in some way. So we ended up starting making our own CSS and rather be stabbed by position and z-index. And to prove my point, CSS is hard. I also don't know if that story makes sense. I really just want to share that alleyway and the fact that I survived 4 months going through there every day. And I think that's a big accomplishment. So CSS is really hard. And the thing is, you can make amazing things with CSS. Who knows what this website is? A lot of people know what this website is. I didn't know if this was just a UK thing, but Linked Cars. Linked Cars is amazing. Linked Cars was made with CSS. I think. I'm not sure. I didn't go on my phone to check if it was Flash, but I think it's CSS. But you can also make horrible things with CSS. I'm very sorry if there's any American person here. Which I think the best explanation for this is that, so Linked Cars looks like crap if you ask a designer, for example. And this looks nice, but it all depends on what you're selling. You're selling good. You're selling happiness. He's not selling happiness. Okay. So what we're going to do is that we're going to walk this alley together so that I don't have to walk it through alone again. And we're going to be fine. I survived, so you can survive all of this weird CSS stuff. So my name's Sarah. And my talk is called The Dark and Lonely Road to Styling in React because I'm very deep. So I am a developer advocate at YLD, as in like a personal thing. I really like horrible, horrible movies like Sharknado. I don't know why. That type of movies gives me life. I guess I like watching people fail on screen. And as a true Portuguese person, I really like football because that's all we got. Okay, so I am going to go through 4 things. The first one is just out-of-the-mill CSS, so normal CSS. Then I'm going to go over using preprocessors, then CSS modules, and then CSS-in-JS. So there are a couple of jokes here that are about chicken shortage. So I will just explain the joke because it was a long time ago. And so what happened was KFC in the UK decided to change vendors that deliver the chicken. And they changed to DHL, but DHL fucked up, so they didn't deliver enough chicken. So there was literally a chicken shortage all around the UK, where like KFC had to close like 70% of their stores and had like signs on the thing saying chicken shortage. And there was in the news and everything. It's like everyone was saying chicken shortage, and I thought that was terrible, so I decided to use that. Okay, so let's start with normal CSS. So how do you use this? And so I think one thing that most people got wrong when we started using CSS and JS is that they completely forgot that we still know how to use link tags. And if you don't, this is a link tag, but I'm pretty sure you do. I'm pretty sure everything's going to be okay. So the way to use this, you just literally put a link tag and you apply it to your CSS. Never forget. Also, I just want to point out that you should never forget that CSS code that you did while jQuery was still a thing that had like 1,500 lines and then I got comments on it because you can import. So it had like comments that say navbar and then a space and then the navbar code and then a space and then a comment that says slider and then the slider code. Yeah, I did that. That was great. Okay, so that obviously didn't work. Because you had a lot of specificity problems, because I don't know who came up with specificity, but if you want a table overview of how specificity works, an element is worth 1 point. For example, it's actually worth 0.2, but I'm really bad at math, so it's worth 1 point. A class is worth 10, okay. An ID is worth 100, and inline styles is worth 1,000. So this is why people tell you not to use IDs, because you need 11 classes to override an ID. And if you have 11 classes, you're probably using Bootstrap, so let's not. Some dudes, or girls, I actually have no idea, sat down and were like, we gotta fix this. And they were like, you know what we should do? BAM. And then BAM came out. I'm pretty sure this was the entire conversation. This does not mean anything. It actually has a meaning. It's like block element modifier. But BAM sounds way better. So how does BAM actually work if you've never used it? So the idea of BAM is really nice. So you have a block. So in this case, the block is the article. And then you have double underscores. And for that, you choose an element. So like the text, the button, the title of that article. And then you have, that's the element, sorry. And then you have modifiers for that. So like a button can be primary, secondary, tertiary, whatever. Depends on how many buttons you have. And this is how it's supposed to work. It's like the idea is really good. The idea of this would allow us for us to have really good, clean code that would be scalable on large applications, but humans tend to fuck everything up. So we ended up with this. And weirdly enough, people didn't like this. I loved it, though. I thought it was great. But yeah, so it backfired a bit. There are a lot of people who can still use BAM and are very good at it, and bless your soul, but this happens to me too. So this is, when I say the reality, I mean my reality, like what happened to me. So there are pros of using BAM, of course. There are pros to everything, except Trump. So it's easy to set up. It's really easy to set up. It's literally a link tag, and it's framework and library agnostic. I'm someone that I do other stuff, like Vue. I like Vue, I'm sorry. And so I really try to look for things that are framework and library agnostic, which is nice. Also, this floor makes a lot of noise. And it does fix some specificity problems. If you are really into doing that correctly, you will fix most of your specificity problems. So everything will be okay, eventually. And it does have a rigid structure, which you may see as a pro. I actually see that as a con, but in general, it's a pro, so it's there now. Cons. So naming is hard. Naming is really fucking hard. Naming and cache invalidation are the two hardest things, but the thing is, Apollo fixed the second one, so now we're just stuck with this one. So naming is really hard, and you still had to name a lot of stuff. I cannot memorize all those rules. And now you're like, there's just 3 rules. Redux has 3 functions. I can't memorize them either. So it's not a problem with BAM, it's a problem with me. And honestly, I think since we are in this componentized area, we kind of deserve better than to have one giant CSS file with comments on it. Okay, so let's go about it. Let's go and talk about preprocessors. I'm going to focus on Sass because I've never used Stylus and I had a terrible experience with less. So how? Webpack. So I'm going to go over how to actually do this in Webpack. So in this case, I'm using Sass and I'm using Node Sass instead of Ruby Sass. The original implementation of Sass was in Ruby, I think. If I'm not correct, please correct me. So I'm also using Yarn. You can use NPM. It's the same thing. So Yarn add, and you installed Sass loader, Node Sass, Webpack, Style loader, and CSS loader. So a whole bunch of stuff. But it's actually really simple in the Webpack config. So the thing that you need to know about Webpack is that Webpack functions the opposite way of the real world. So it doesn't read things from the beginning of the array to the end of the array. No. That would be way too fucking easy. It's just like, I'm going to reverse this array, and it's going to make no fucking sense to you for 2 months. But then you're going to be like, oh, that's why. So it gets here, and it's like, okay, you got Sass, and then it transforms it to CSS, and then it does a style loader so you can get all your stuff into the HTML. Because it works the other way around. And this was the idea. And one of the most amazing things for me when it came to preprocessors, besides variables, because variables are dope, was nesting. I thought nesting was a great idea. Because look at this. This is way more clean than we used to have. But again, we as humans tend to fuck everything up. So this turned out to be the reality of what things happened. And this is not actually better. I mean, is it? I actually don't know. I think it's slightly better, slightly worse. I guess you'll never know. But like I said, we tend to fuck everything up and just ending up with things like this. And then that's why we started having linters for CSS. That's it. You can nest more than 3, and you're like, and then it started, yeah. So then that's when the overriding linters started happening. So there are pros to using Sass or less or stylus. I actually use Sass for a very long time. When I do Vue, I also use Sass. Nesting is dope. Like, you gotta give it to nesting. If you don't overuse it, nesting is really nice. Like, I can't code without nesting anymore. I just can't do it. I don't know why. Variables are also dope. Like, you gotta give it to variables. If there weren't variables, there wouldn't be no JavaScript. If there were no JavaScript, none of us would have a job. So variables, yay. So server-side rendering is a real concern nowadays because, well, server-side rendering, we should have it for SEO and for speedness and stuff like that. And so it's server-side render after Webpack does this thing, because it just pastes that on the HTML, so that's good. And you can combine this with BEM for, like, super dopeness, if that makes sense, which is good. But like everything in life, it has cons. So you have more dependencies to handle. And you also have to handle Webpack. And yeah, Webpack. It's hard for library authoring. So if you have a library and you want people to just use your code, they can't if they don't have a loader for that. So if you can't just send Sass code to the browser, the browser's gonna be like, oh, what's this? What the fuck are you talking about? So you have to send them the compiled CSS code, which makes it really hard for library authors to be able to allow you to make themes without you like importing all the things, like Bootstrap. So we'd all end up with Bootstrap. So it's really hard for this kind of stuff. Also, a thing is, like, you can manage to make this componentized. You can. Everything is possible. I believe in you. But by default, these types of things are not componentized, which is a shame since React and the new web is kind of going through the direction of making everything componentized. So I think we should do something about that. And there's no JS magic in your CSS. And I guess, like, what is CSS without any JS magic? I may also be a little biased in this talk. It was not the point when I wrote it. I was trying to be unbiased, but by the end of it, I was just like, you know what, fuck it. So CSS modules. So the way that CSS modules work is that you import your styles and they transform it into a giant object. So you imagine that you have a whole bunch of stuff in your styles, like .page, .content or something, and transforms that into an object and then matches the object to the thing in here. So page matches this page, and then it will just append it to the before in this case. And yeah, so you import it, and you just import it normally, so you import styles from styles.css. Which may look weird the first time you do it, because you're literally importing styles from styles.css, and it's weird, but it's fine. So how do you do this? And so you may notice that this is a different theme. This is because post-CSS next has been deprecated in terms for post-CSS preset env, and I changed themes by the time that so this is a different theme. So, Webpack, yay. Style loader, CSS loader, post-CSS loader, and you install post-CSS preset env. You don't have to install post-CSS, but I find it that it's a good way of trying to use standards in CSS. So the way that post-CSS preset env works is basically like Babel works. So a couple of months ago, I think it was a couple of months ago, all the Babel presets for stages have been deprecated in favor of just using Babel preset env. Because the idea with env is that your code, the Babel will eventually be obsolete. So they will just keep deleting code as like your browser start implementing the things that you're using. So the idea of Babel is to be obsolete, which is nice. Continuing. So there's one option that you need to put in CSS loader that will allow you for CSS modules, which is actually pretty sweet. It's really easy to just like, you go to loader, CSS loader, and then you add options, modules, true. And there's also this option called camel case. And if you don't know about this, I'm about to blow your fucking minds off. So you know when you create like a class in like kebab case, or like the way we do it in JavaScript, in camel case. I don't know why I said kebab case. So in camel case, and you create page container, and then you just put the C like bigger, and then you go to the CSS, and a part of you just like, I gotta write this in camel case, and that's not how I thought to write CSS. You can do this, and the styles object will export two properties, one in camel case and one like dash hyphenated, so that you can write it hyphenated, so that you don't have to hate yourself every time you're trying to write CSS in camel case. Okay, so post CSS config, also new theme, sorry. Post CSS config, and you just add post CSS preset env. The way that this works is also like Babel works. If you want some configuration, you can just add like, I just want the latest 3 versions of Chrome, which makes no sense because Chrome updates automatically, but you know what I mean. So there are pros to using this. I've used CSS modules and post CSS for a very long time, and actually had pretty much no problems with it. I tried to use CSS modules with post processors and had some problems with it. So that's why I went with post CSS. So you can use all the new CSS things. And the really cool thing about this is that you're not using things that will never work. You're using things that have been spec'd and are following a certain pattern of rules, and that will eventually be in the browser. So you're making future-proof, whatever that means. So variables and nesting are still dope. So you can still have variables. So you use normal CSS custom properties, which are called variables or custom properties, and that's how you use them. And it polyfills to browsers that don't understand what the hell that is. Safari. And it's also server-side rendered after Webpack does this thing, because the thing that you're doing is that you're also transforming that to CSS, and then you're just putting that in the HTML, so all is going to be okay. It's way more component-based, so it's more maintainable. I think the more component-based we get in terms of CSS, the more maintainable that CSS will be, because we'll have to override less CSS, and overriding CSS is the death of a developer. And it's honestly pretty sweet. Like, I didn't have a lot of problems with it. I've used it for about 1.5 years. It was pretty nice, and that was about it. So obviously there are cons. So does anyone remember, like raise your hands, please, when you used to look for elements by their class names on like the console when you went on Chrome? Does no one else do this? That's fucking, you can't do that anymore. And that hurts me so bad. So like you gotta look for the content now, and that's like, okay. So you get unreadable class names, which is only bad for this particular situation, but it's really good for class names not colliding, because you can actually change this, and you won't get unreadable class names, but then your shit won't work, because you'll have 2 of the same class names. So, balance. Again, more dependencies, more Webpack. Nobody wants to handle more dependencies, and no one wants to handle Webpack. So, also another thing is that if you just use CSS modules out of the box, you won't get variables, you won't get nesting, so you'll just have plain CSS that you can componentize. So by itself, CSS modules bring some good things, but it's not the best thing that ever happened to this world ever since sliced bread. So it needs to be paired with something like post-CSS or preprocessors. I think it has gotten way better to be working with preprocessors by now, and for a very good experience using it. Also, there is a global thing. I think every type of things that I'm going to talk about have a global thing, and it's really easy to abuse those things. So these things exist because of plugins mostly. So not plugins, components, because of external components that are already styled by themselves. So you need to have a global thing so you can override those CSS as class. So CSS-in-JS. So first thing that I want to say is that I will focus on using with style components, mostly not because of anything in particular, more than this is the library that I mostly use, so I am most familiar with it, but there are many other options, emotion or glamorous, or there are a lot of them. Just like, there are a lot. Okay, so, yarn add style components. Yay, that's about it. Okay, so how do you actually use this? I warned you about the jokes. They're not even funny anymore. So, how do you use this? So this is a div. So we just have a plain div inside of a fragment for some reason. I don't know. If you don't know what fragments is, they just put at dumb elements and don't actually render anything, so they're good if you don't want to put divs around everything. And so we import style from style components, and then we defined a name for our new component. This needs to be in camel case, otherwise it won't work, and you will look at your code, and you will not understand why it doesn't work. It's because of that. I'm just going to tell you that. It never happened to me, obviously. So you say style dot and the name of the HTML element that you want to style. So this will support, I think, every HTML element there is. If you want to style a custom React component, this needs to be a function, and you will pass it the actual component. So if it's like a link from React router, you just say styled, and you open parentheses, and you pass link inside of it. So it's the same idea. And then you just give it like anything that you want to give it. So in this case, I just set it the width to be huge, position absolute, display flex, and just put everything in the center. And then instead of using a div, you just use this component. So as you can see, like, it's pretty componentized by default, which is something that I really appreciate because it makes our styles way, way more maintainable. Also, if you don't like the fact that everything is in one page, that's fine. You can put it in another page and just import styles from styles.js. And just use like styles.chicken or just import chicken from styles.js. And so the biggest thing that I've heard when it comes to complaining about CSS and JS, which has actually been happening a lot for the past like week, I don't know why. I think like every 3 months there's like a biological clock on Twitter that is just like, you know what, CSS, we gotta complain about CSS. And I'm just like, why? What happened? Nothing literally happened. I have no idea what happened. There was nothing to trigger this. One day someone just got up and it was like, CSS and JS, bad. And I'm like, okay, cool. Nice talk. Okay, so this uses next.js, and so what you need to do is that to actually use it as server-side render, when you render this on the server, you need to get a new server style sheet. So I'll go over all of this stuff. So you need to get a new server style sheet. This is how it creates a block of CSS to actually put into your HTML, and then you render the page. Then you render this page, and then you collect the styles of the app. Yeah, so the thing is, this is using Next, so Next needs to render the page. Usually don't need to render the page if you're using another thing like Carousel or something. And you just need to, like, you get sheet, and then you collect the styles of the app that you have. So of the main thing, and that will go through all of your all of your three, yes, 3. And get all of the styles that are attached to every single element, and you will put them all in this page thing. And you then append it to the sheet, and then you just get the style elements. And after you get the style elements, I don't know what the fuck that was, you just need to say this.props.style tags, and this will put everything in server-side rendering. So the most important 3 parts of this is that you need to instantiate a new server style sheet, you need to collect the styles from your main app component, and that will go through all of your components inside of that. That was better than trying to screw up saying 3 again. And you just get the style element, and after that, you get it inside of your HTML, and this will server-side render everything, which is really nice. Okay, so I am going to go over some pros that I found while using style components. For the past about a year, I've been using style components, for about a year, and yeah, that's about it. So one good thing that we get in style components is that we get conditionals in CSS. So you kind of got this in CSS modules. So you have this thing where you can apply a class if something is true. So you had like class name, and you can say like, I have a class content that I want to apply if this.state that whatever is equal to true. And you could do this, and that was fine, but not really. And people started getting annoyed by the little things. And in this case, you can just have actual conditionals in CSS, because the way that this works is that this is just a template string. So inside of here, you can use whatever you want. You can use variables, you can use conditionals. So if you just wrap it around curly brackets, you can just say if there are props, if props.primary is true, then change the color to blue, otherwise change it to red. So you can do everything that you can do in normal JavaScript. You can do it inside of here. You can map all over things, you can conditional things, you can do pretty much anything that you want, which is good. You still have to know CSS though, because this part is just CSS. Cool. I'm glad we covered that one. Yay. Theming is super easy. Not super easy, like nothing is super easy. It's fucking JavaScript. It's easy though. It's easier than CSS modules. So the way you do theming is that Style Components, Emotion also has this, has a theme provider. And to this theme provider, you can pass variables to it. So you can say primary and red, for example. And the primary color, when you use it, will be props.theme.primary color, and it will be red. So all you really need to do is override this. So when you import something else, you just need to get the variables that that component uses and override those. And if you override this at the base level of your app, you get a new fancy theme, which makes theming way easier for library authors. It makes theming way easier for us as well, because you can toggle a thing and change the state at the top of your app, and that will change the state, that will change the colors of everything. I mean, this is very broad, like no more specificity problems. I mean, you'll probably still have some. But if you do, please tell me how, because I've never done that. But yay. Okay, so in general, you won't have a lot of more specificity problems because most of the things will be in the same page. So you'll be able to follow along with the CSS that you're writing. Even if you add it into another page, it will be the same as CSS module. So you won't have a lot of more specificity problems because it will just have, so you have a folder for your component, JS, JS file, styles.js, app.js, something like that. And you may think this is dumb, but the company, I worked in a company about, I think, a year and a half ago, where we didn't have auto prefix, like installed by default for some reason. And none of my shit worked on Safari. So this is good. It auto prefixes everything. It doesn't auto prefix stuff that doesn't need auto prefixing. Like sometimes you add auto prefixer and then you get WebKit border radius, and you're like, this hasn't been a thing for like 4 years. So that doesn't do that. So you just get border radius. Also, I don't think naming things is that hard anymore. And this is the best thing ever. I don't think you should do this for everything, but like if you have a section, you can just literally call it section styled. And that's it. But you should get normal names. But it's not as hard to name things anymore, and that's really good. Because an input, if you're going to use it everywhere, you just call it input. And that's fine, with a capital I, so you know that it's a style component instead of being a normal HTML component. But like everything in life, it has cons. It forces you to think about CSS in a different way. So the way that I think about this is like Flexbox. I know a lot of people apparently hate Flexbox. I fucking love Flexbox. Flexbox is great. But the thing about Flexbox is that we were used to just floating things to the left. And that's just how you created layout. So you created with the child components. But then at one point, they were like, no, this doesn't make any sense. What you're doing is dumb. So you're going to do this with the parent component. And you're like, wait, what? But after a while, you started getting used to it. Maybe you still look up the properties, but you now find it weird to do layouts with just the child components, and now you just do it with the parent component. So it took some time for us to get used to Flexbox. Like, it's going to take you some time, maybe, to get used to using CSS and JS, but you may feel more comfortable after a while. It's another thing to teach everyone. It's also another thing to say that it's not wrong to everyone. Which may be a problem. It usually isn't. It's just like, so we use style components here as the docs, because the docs are actually pretty good. They're like view-level docs, so that's good. And so depending on the CSS and JS library that you use, you may have to use object-based CSS. So React Native, for example. By default, React Native uses style sheet, and style sheet is just an object that you have to specify the CSS properties in like camel case, and I hate that. Some people are okay with that. I hate that. So if your app is server-side rendering and your styles are not server-side rendering, you will get the biggest crap that you'll ever see in your life, which is this flash of HTML that has no styling whatsoever. Like your internet has gone super slow, but it's not. You just need to do both things. So if you need to make sure that if your app is server-side rendering, you need to also do that extra bit of work to make your components, your style server-side rendering. Okay. I also want to point out that, for example, I can't be trusted with BEM. Like, I can't. I'll fuck up. And it's obvious, and then a week later, I won't know what anything is. But that's me. I need things to be componentized in order for me to make things to work for a larger audience and to make things work for longer. But I want to point out that no one is wrong, because if you can work with BEM, and that's what you're most comfortable with, do it. No one cares. And also, no one is right. Because the thing is, I'm not right. The day that I'm right is going to be great. But I want to point out that we're just people like you speaking differently on a stage that makes really a lot of noise. It's kind of annoying right now. So I'm not saying that I'm right. This was the path that I took. And I want to point out that no matter what people say and how right they seem to be, it's like, you should use this. They're not right. Like, no one is. You can use anything that you want. So it all depends on what it's used for. For example, like if you just have a really small thing, you can just have a CSS file and that's fine. You can just import it in your index and just use a CSS file. I've done that several times. And that's fine. I use, for example, when I have really small projects, who's heard of Tachyons, the CSS framework? Okay, so Tachyons is like a modular CSS framework that just gives you class names like empty do, and it's just like margin top 2. And margin top like 10 pixels, for example. So I've used Tachyons for full-blown apps because it was just a dumb website that I was making, and I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna use Tachyons. Just fuck it. I don't want it. I don't want to deal with this anymore. So I just used Tachyons, and it was fine. And use whatever makes your code better and whatever makes your code faster. Whether that be normal plain CSS, whether that be object-based CSS-in-JS, use whatever makes your code better and faster. That's about it. All that I really want is to bring GeoCities back. And any type of CSS that you use on the internet can bring GeoCities back. So that's completely fine. Whatever you use, to me, is completely fine. I just went with style components. You can go with whatever, as long as you code faster and you code better and you're happier doing it. So yeah, so this is my talk. Thank you. You can find these slides at dark/css.now.sh. And yeah, that's about it.
Do you have any questions? One or two questions?